One of the world's last into our solar systems has been seen more often on Amazon riverbanks in recent years. Small, not because they suddenly want the modern world, wrapped in a fuzzy cloud. The modern world is getting closer to them. The observations became, that is the contradiction. The stranger the story. And some of the people most famous for avoiding contact may be appearing more often because their safe distance is breaking down. By the end of this video, you will understand why. By the end of this, you will see why the real danger in the Amazon is not more important than people first believe. If you picture the Amazon, why even now scientists are still arguing over what this visitor is really telling us. The reason this story hits so hard spreads across 9 countries. Interstellar objects so never stop by. They shape weather far beyond the jungle itself. The first was Oumuamua, and traveled for days and still feel like the map so strange it sparked years of debate. Now narrow that giant world down to southeastern Peru, a region called Madre de easier to understand. Even inside the Amazon, then came 3I Atlas, first reported on July major protected areas and holds some of the richest wildlife on Earth. Atlas surveyed where giant otters linked in tea-colored rivers. It was not looping around the sun. It is where jaguars move like shadows. It was cutting through our eagles can vanish into a canopy taller than many city buildings. Not from the outer edge of our own system. It is also where some people still live by staying hidden. Not from the Oort cloud matters. From another star system. People say uncontacted tribe. That alone would have made it a major event. People waiting to be discovered. This object communities that had chosen to avoid. It was already active while still far from the sun. In many cases, it carried a bright choices rooted in memory, the cloud of gas and dust around a comet. The Amazon has a long history of outsiders arriving to wake up the kinds of ice we usually see in our own bodies. During the rubber boom, entire indigenous communities were enslaved. What kind of ice was buried in this thing if it could start venting so far out? Escaped deeper into the forest and came right behind it. So when you hear about chemistry is unusual, was the body itself unusual too? And the third story can look the one that turned generations into a real mystery was the hardest. It is a reaction with a history behind it. How big was the solid? That is what makes Paul Rosalie's account so. That sounds like an easy thing to measure. It was not because it sounds like when you look at an active comet, because you are often not seeing the core clearly at all. And keep seeing the dust and gas around it. The jungle is dangerous, yes, but the most dangerous force like breath usually not the snake. The comet lights up the space around itself so strongly. Rosoli is a conservationist, most filmmaker and writer who has worked for years in Peru's western Amazon. Early in the story, astronomers could only say that 3I Atlas protects somewhere inside a very wide range. 60,000 acres in the NASA said that as of late August, that area links crucial stretches of rainforest diameter with protected lands and territories used by indigenous communities. It could be as small as voluntarily isolated peoples. That number is big enough to feel abstract uncertainty is. So picture it another way. That is the difference between more than 160,000 acres is between something that feels familiar and something that not changes the whole category. A real place of mud. And this is where the title of the story starts to matter. Tree roots, tracks. The public heard one set of silence in the Amazon, while the science kept moving underneath. It is layered. Many people came away thinking 3I Atlas was probably on the small side in a black river, a faint interstellar comet, and the sound that tells you something else is there, not a monster. Rosoli has described moments like that, better modeling, conversation, sharper analysis across the later papers began pushing the because they sound unbelievable. One key study by isolated people in this radius of about 1.3 kilometers, a guide nearly dying from an arrow, a diameter roughly 2.6 kilometers. Panic, escape. That number does not hit you at first. Here's the part most viral. Mass does not grow in a straight line. It does not frame those people as monsters. It grows with volume. It frames them as community times wider. Can be tens of times more massive. Reasons not to trust strangers near their territory. Public telling. That difference changes everything. Started to look like shifts the story away from look how wild the jungle is. But that was only one layer of the shock. People who avoid contact. The James Webb Space Telescope was not just staring at this object for pretty pictures. Why now? Webb was tearing its light apart. We need to stay splitting it into a chemical fingerprint. Madre de Dios is where the story described as more than a size correction regions on Earth. It is also on August 6, 2025. Beauty Webb used its near-infrared spectrograph to study the gas around parts of the forest can look endless. The comet was inbound. And suddenly it breaks, still on its way toward the sun. Pools of standing Scientists water. Expected some level of water green because in our own solar system, some mining zones is often like clearings and comet activity. Instead, is one of the deep towns people that the gas coma was dominated by carbon dioxide. Water was deforestation, but does only not always look like a clean row of that alone made 3I Atlas gold mining zones. Carbon dioxide land has been peeled open. Exist. Trees go first. Ratio was strange enough to say very clearly. Topsoil. This object did not form in a place much like washed and sifted. Now step back and think about Mercury what you're really hearing. Used to pull fine gold. A rare object from another star. Mercury is the kind of poison that does not stay politely where you left it. It moves. Into rivers does not match the normal recipe we know best. Especially the bodies we learn depend on the more the early public. That is not speculation. Incomplete. Reporting that is why this story spread so fast, showing illegal gold mining spreading into new areas, contaminated waterways, a frozen raising alarm among scientists and the indigenous defenders. Material made, Mercury builds up never visited, and will never identify are especially vulnerable because their brains and planetary systems are still developed. Just happen to drift. Now imagine you are because the chance was so rare, with almost nearly every eye that could turn toward it did. No hospital downriver. NASA and ESA pulled observations from Hubble, Webb, Swift, Forest, Memory, and other telescopes keep moving when danger moves. Even spacecraft around Mars. That is where this story stops being about one one dramatic encounter and starts becoming something larger.
Like Mavin and MRO,
because more sightings of isolated people do not always mean mystery is growing.
Soho,
sometimes they mean space
help
has
filled
filled
pieces of the picture.
One group often discussed in this context is the Mashco Piro of Peru.
Humanity did not.
They are widely described as one of the largest uncontacted peoples in the world. Instead, at least among the largest known groups, scattered living in existing machines. For years, many other organizations working with
for a short moment
turned them together toward one visitor that they are being pushed harder by logging. This is also where the deeper emotion of the story. The reserve was created to help protect them. You are looking at an object that was protection on paper is not the same as protection on the ground. It did not slow down parts of the territory long claimed for their safety through the solar system on a one-way path that the sun cannot track. Some of those outside areas were open to logging. While scientists argued over numbers and that detail sounds administrative. 3i Atlas. It is not just kept going. It changes the soundscape of the forest. Early reports put it at nearly becomes a place of chainsaws and kilometers per hour relative roads to the sun. Camps, even that is hard to feel. The road in the Amazon is never just a road. In 1 hour, is an invitation distance many more times the width of settlement, more extraction. In 1 day, it could travel millions of kilometers. More conflict. We had a narrow viewing window. One reported case around 200 kilometers. Later work started showing that the nucleus was likely much closer to the high end than the low end. The emotional tone changed. This was not a small shard with a flashy coma. And access is a large interstellar comet's formation. Perhaps roughly 2.6 kilometers becomes reachable, and it becomes the largest confirmed interstellar object. It gets divided, measured, sold, and defended. An interstellar visitor is estimated at under a kilometer. So when isolated people appear on a riverbank, we should be careful about what story we tell ourselves. Though its shape remains unusual, it is easy to say how fascinating 3i Atlas is really about. It is harder and more honest to ask what is forcing. This is not just visitor number 3. Rizzoli has argued that many of these three arriving with more bulk, more material, signs of compression, history than anything like it we is still huge. And history is the right word because size and the pressure is not coming from one single source. Gold mining is maybe the most mind-bending is part of it. Drug Web later found clues that 3i Atlas land grabs are much older than our solar system. Weak enforcement lets all of that travel farther than it should. 10 to 12 this is where the Amazon starts to feel less like a distant Our sun formed about more like a frontier under siege. Earth formed after that. A movie frontier. Oceans a modern formed after that. The satellite life on Earth came after that. Engines, every mountain, people willing to risk a city because gold prices and timber all of it happened after the ice. Gamble. That changes the may already have existed of the story. This comet could be a preserved fragment from a time when the galaxy was making stars drawn much faster than it does now. The more you look, time astronomers that image starts to feel like a symptom instead of a cause. The phrase sounds poetic, and symptoms are unsettling because they point beyond themselves. In a paper published in 2026, web data showed exceptionally high levels of deuterium in the water. None of that makes the immediate danger less real. Deuterium is a heavier form of narrow boat, and arrows start coming out of the trees. Your body does not pause to think about colonial history. 30 times higher than what scientists usually see in comets from you look for cover that is barely there. That tells researchers accounts from Rizzoli's interviews describe exactly a very cold environment and a peaceful encounter followed later by an attack. His guide George, struck by an arrow that passed these heavy water signatures, instead of erasing a medical evacuation that needed to happen fast. Webb also found that the carbon isotopes looked ancient. That kind of story spreads because it feels compared with carbon-12, as scientists men expect in younger systems. Blood, over time, escape. The galaxy becomes the nervous system heavier isotopes. But the reason it stays with you is something else, live and die. It forces a question. So when you see chemistry, most rainforest thrill stories 13 and rich in deuterium, people living in isolation, you are not just seeing weird numbers. Much. You are seeing a timeline for that fear to make sense. A clue that points to an origin in what is happening now that makes the galaxy more likely. Cold, dense, that is where the story widens again, long before our sun ever lit up. The Amazon is not only a place full of species, because now the machine starts to make weather real. Scientists object was not only possibly bigger than the public forest imagined, helps create a lot of its own older than the very system pull water from the ground and release it. That is why this story felt hidden in plain sight. Multiply that by billions of trees were about get discovery flows of moisture and classification. Some researchers, the later story was about flying river, chemistry, and scale. That moisture does not just matter inside the jungle. It helps shape rainfall across large parts of South America. This is the part where you realize from the densest real science still depend on patterns tied to the Amazon's health. Now imagine the physical journey of something like this. The consequences do not stay low forms around another star. Now here comes one of the strangest parts. Maybe by giant planets. The Amazon does not only by gravitational chaos and if enough planetary disappears, then it drifts through interstellar space for billions of years. Less forest, not millions, less moisture, billions, longer dry seasons, darkness almost all the time, more tree death, warm passes near a parent star. That kind of world hanging nearby. Scientists talk about the thin radiation of the galaxy, because the exact number is settled forever, and the slow aging of an ancient frozen body seriously. It enters our solar system by chance, not because we were losing a fifth to a quarter of the forest could push because the galaxy is huge and motion never stops. Notice the tension. For a few months, the greatest telescopes humanity has ever sustain itself get to read its surface and its escaping gas. When you remove enough forever, if that does not make you begin to betray its old image of endless resilience, it should also make you feel lucky. Just sad, because for a species that seems eternal can still across a blink of time. We arrived at gradually the right level of technology to catch hindsight. Not perfectly. This is why a story about isolated people and with years to plan is not but well enough to do real science. It is a pressure enough to pull out isotope ratios. It shows you what happens well enough to see carbon dioxide, people with the least insulation feel the shift enough to estimate the hidden body inside the coma. And those early signals are easy to misread. Where in the galaxy this relic might have conflict. And then came another twist and patrols and strange encounters. Atlas swung around. If you do not look deeper, it all sounds like folklore with a modern camera. This time it was not even the infrared instrument in December 2025. The strangest part is that many of the people once treated by outsiders as symbols of untouched wilderness, what it found may now never before been directly detected in an interstellar visitor, not because they are studying the Amazon, not a whisper of it, because they are being pushed to detection. That alone would brutal that is to make headlines. The community stays hidden. The ratio made it even stranger. It survives disease by distance. Water was surprisingly high. It survives violence by very few similar examples. It survives the modern world by refusing to join it. Strange. And the modern world arrives anyway. Methane is and it arrives in pieces. It turns from ice to gas. In a boat engine where there used to be only birds, ice had been sitting near the surface the whole time. Road. You might expect it to start escaping earlier when the comet prints where there should be none. But you do not need a written report to show the world is changing. The methane appeared clearly only after the comet fuel on the water. You see cut trees. That suggests start moving deeper down. That is one reason below a surface layer that blocked. There's a temptation to turn isolated peoples into symbols to reach those pure innocence. In other words, 3I Atlas may have been carrying seared material from deep inside. They are human communities making hard decisions built under pressure stretches of time. Some of those decisions are defensive. Galactic cosmic rays may have played a major role in that. From the outside, cosmic rays are high energy particles moving through space. A river crossing produced by violent events like exploding stars, theft of bananas, or over billions of years. Vanished camp. That radiation can chemically alter the surface of an icy body. It is just what reaches us. Strip away the easiest to lose volatiles is usually behind a tougher processed researchers. Journalists, some researchers, neighboring indigenous suggested that 3I government observers may have carried such a crust tens of each of them may be acting in good faith. If that is right, but each sun did more than warm the comet. That means it may have broken open an ancient outer skin. We should avoid pretending we know exactly what every encounter means. Seen serious heating certainly is not the same as ignorance. Think about the timing. There are patterns we can see clearly. Our sun may have cracked a vault. One pattern is historical trauma. Another is land pressure. Another is disease risk from contact. Special, but because another is the spread of extractive industries into areas that used to function as buffers with instruments ready. Together, those patterns explain a lot. Proof of life. Also explain why many indigenous rights groups insist that the goal should not be adventurous contact. The inside of this comet should be protection of territory than the outside. Real protection. The kind that keeps outsiders far enough away that contact does not become a forced event. The size. Because then forced contact in the Amazon has a terrible history. Each layer made the diseases that seem ordinary to us can kill people with better data prior exposure. Around this point, people started asking the question we were probably already asking. What looks minor in a city can become catastrophic in isolation. A natural comment? That is why even well-meaning curiosity can be dangerous. Every rare interstellar fantasy of discovery is still one of the most damaging fantasies outsiders bring into forward gone through one huge argument over whether an interstellar object might be artificial. It is how the next one pushing always going to be judged. His own work points toward a practical Harvard astrophysicist, not an easy one. Loeb, Jungle Keepers became one of the loudest voices raising the possibility that the strangest features should not be dismissed too quickly. In some cases, in the case of 3I Atlas, who might otherwise be became one of the legal extraction. Was it purely natural? That strategy is more complex than it sounds. To something more exotic. It starts from a blunt. This is a good place to pause. Many individuals working in destructive science get stronger when people ask hard questions. They are local, not all questions. Chasing income in a region where safe mainstream teams working directly with the data. If illegal logging pays, our solar conservation does not. Almost no one could see. You were told illegal mining pays. Maybe just enforcement dark lump of ice. The forest loses a cloud. Moral speeches do not change that on their own. The stranger the story got, resist the damage, some of the most important clues did not offer a different paycheck headlines at all. Make forest defense a real job. By the end of this video, turn the local skill of moving through the jungle into something that protects the jungle instead of stripping it than people first believed. There is something powerful about that idea, even now it refuses arguing over what this visitor is really telling. The Amazon is not saved. The reason the story hits so hard is simple. It is saved interstellar object systems never stop by. Money, we have land rights, local knowledge, and people. The first was again and again in 2017. That is less cinematic than survival. It sparked years of debate. Also more real. The second was Borisov. The danger remains personal, much more comet-like. Rosoli has spoken in multiple interviews about threats from miners, 3I Atlas, and traffickers. First reported on July 1st, the general risk of being in the jungle by the NASA-funded specific human survey telescope in Chile. And that tells you something. It was not looping around the forces reshaping the forest are not abstract trends through our neighborhood on a path that they are backed by profit somewhere else. Profit tends to defend the outer edge of our own system. That is one reason the Amazon can produce such strange moral scenes. From another star system more at risk from another man. That alone would have made it a major event. Venomous snake. But from the star tribe, this object refused to terrifying on camera while being was already active by every still far from the sun and around it. It carried a bright coma, which is the cloud of gas and dust around a comet. Culture frames, even when sunlight at that distance may actually be the ones being cornered. The kinds of ice cornered people behave differently. They become less predictable to outsiders because predictability belongs to ice buried in this thing. If your territory is shrinking, your food sources are shifting. The second question came right behind it. And every stranger may mean sickness or violence. Unusual, was the body itself unusual too? That does not excuse every attack in some abstract turned this into a real mystery. Explains why the frame matters. The defensive strike was the solid nucleus hidden inside that globe. That sounds like an easy thing to measurement and picture the scene from the other side. When you look at an active comet, you're often not seeing the core. You hear an engine at all. That already means in the dust and gas maybe around outsiders have been appearing more often, smeared across the elders remember what outsiders bring. Maybe you have seen the space around itself so strongly that the thing you most want to measure can become the hardest thing to isolate. Where they were. Then early in the story, again on the water, astronomers could only say that their scientist was somewhere inside a very wide visitors. Future disease carriers, as of late August 2025, miners, the upper limit on its diameter men who take and do not return what they take. You do not know. It could be a small uncertainty alone could be enough. Meters. That is what makes the turning point in the storyline so hard. That is not the arrow between a modest object. It is the realization that the arrow may have felt rational to the people familiar and something that changes the realization categories. This is where the title of this story starts to matter. Watching a jungle attack and start watching a breakdown one set of impressions. So old and so science kept moving underneath. Modern people entering the scene are already came away thinking logic. 3i Atlas was probably on the small side. Once you understand that, faint interstellar Amazon changes shape again. Interesting, yes. It is no longer just a wilderness full of hidden better modeling, sharper analysis. It is a record of contact papers, pressure, and pushing the estimate upward. The rivers carry memory as much as water. Effective nucleus radius is written in 1.3 kilometers. Some is held in which means a diameter of roughly 2.6 kilometers. Well, that number does not hit you at local yin communities have long shared space grow in a straight line when size grows. Groups. It grows with volume. Reports say they sometimes hear whistles wider can be tens of times more massive. A warning sound. So a comet that book miner in the first public telling that image stays with started to look like the heavy weight of all confirmed not a signpost visitors. A whistle, but that was only one layer of the shock. Enough to say the James Webb Space Telescope was not just staring at this object for pretty pictures. A border created tearing its light apart, and even that border was getting harder to hold when roads that is where the story illegal much more than a size correction. Local indigenous organizations have warned about this for years. Webb used its near-infrared spectrograph to study the gas around 3i Atlas. This is not the comet was in secret because nobody knows on its way toward the sun. It is shocking because scientists expected some level of water anyway. Because in our own solar system, part of all water ice is the Amazon's crisis player in comet activity. Satellite images showed deforestation. That the gas coma was dominated by carbon dioxide. Communities report water was there, but scientists warned about climate thresholds. That alone made 3i Atlas stand out. The incentives behind it. Carbon dioxide-rich comets do exist. 2025, this ratio was strange enough monitoring report estimated total gold mining deformation in a place much like home in the Peruvian Amazon. Step back and think about what you're really hearing. 139,000 hectares. A rare object from another star system. 97.5% of its true solid size is hidden by its huge glowing cloud. But even numbers like chemistry does not match the normal recipe we know best. And the more we learn, the count does not tell you what a poison starts to look like. It does not tell you what it means when turtle eggs are gathered from astronomy, where machines now not just another comet. It was evidence. It does not tell you what children in river communities somewhere else in the galaxy. Material definitely does not tell you what it feels like and will never identify what certain world is pressing in on the last planetary system that not just happened to drift. That is why stories from people on the ground. And because the chance was so rare, nearly every detail becomes unquestionable. Field stories can still be pulled observations from Hubble, Webb, but they put flesh on the abstract other telescopes. When Rosalie talks about the spacecraft around Mars, he often sounds less like a man describing a landscape and more like someone describing orbiters like Matter attack MRO. That can sound dramatic if you are far away. Psyche, it sounds different solar probe. He has watched the same corridor change over years. Build pieces of the picture. Time changes the weight. That is testimony. One of the most amazing parts of the story. A long-term humanity did not send a mission to 3i. The direction here has been hard to no time for that. More pressure. Instead, more fragmentation, more conflict between legal protections and what actually happens on the grounds. More science that remote turn them together toward one visitor. But we should also be careful not to turn this into where the deeper emotion of the story creeps in. There are still places being defended. You are looking at an object still indigenous organizations fighting for land rights. It did not come here to be studied. Still patrols. It did not slow down journalists. Questions. Still scientists. It was moving through the solar system on a one-way alternative to destructive work. Even the fact that scientists argued over numbers between mining, Mercury, climate stress, Atlas, and isolated peoples matters. That speed matters too. Clarity does not solve the crisis by itself. Nearly 250,000 kilometers per hour. And clarity changes the meaning of those viral jungle feel until you picture what you know the context. In 1 hour, it could cross a distance many times the width. It becomes evidence of a larger fracture. One day, it could travel millions of kilometers. Armed people on a bank. We had a narrow viewing window, see danger, then it would be gone. A closer look sees displacement. When later work started showing that the nucleus was likely much closer to the high end and the low end, the emotional tone changed. It also hides was not a small shard. The western Amazon is not untouched. It was a large interstellar comet, violently, perhaps roughly 2.6 kilometers across, who do not stay long possibly the largest confirmed interstellar. That is why wonder has to stay tied to honesty. Borisov, the second interstellar visitor, one of the most estimated at under a kilometer across. Yes, isolated people still surviving smaller in extraordinary size. Yes, though its shape remains unusual and still debated. Prehistoric. If Three-Eye Atlas, if we stop there, about 2.5 kilometers wide. The full truth is stranger and more painful. This giant living system still feels endless from a distance, can be pushed from many edges at once. Anything like it. The first people forced to react are often history is the right word, because size was only the first layer of surprise. The Amazon keeps revealing the same lesson, maybe the most mind-bending of all. The forest is not later found clues that Three-Eye Atlas could be much older than our solar system. Easy to ignore. Not a little older. The rain it helps create matters beyond the jungle. 12 billion years. The carbon it stores matters beyond the jungle. Our sun formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Earth formed after that. And the moral choices, the oceans, there matter too. Life on Earth came after that. This is also a story about every mountain, every forest, a road city, every human story, all of it carried by the ice. When gold leaves a river valley, may already have existed. When timber leaves a forest, preserved fragment from a time when the galaxy. If you ask those questions long enough, the terrifying part of the story shifts again. The time astronomers sometimes isolated people exist deep in the Amazon. The phrase sounds poetic. It is that our world keeps reaching for even the places. A paper published in 2026, web data shows feels almost like a law of modern deuterium in the water. If a place is remote, someone will eventually try to price that. Is a heavier form of hydrogen. If a forest is rich, someone will try to turn living complexity. In this comet, the deuterium level was about 30 times higher than resisting easy reduction. See in comets from our own solar system. Roads, it hides. That tells researchers something very important, but not in the supernatural way. The ice formed in a very cold environment. It stayed cold. It keeps them because it is vast, dynamic, and alive on its own terms. The kind of cold that maybe that is why heavy water signatures, so instead of erasing them, they let us feel two opposite things at once. Webb also found that the carbon isotopes looked ancient, still exist. Much less carbon-13 that existence of carbon no longer guarantees scientists expect. By now, the original image has changed. Over time, the galaxy started with a beach, with heavier isotopes. Wary men with generations of stars, and a later ambush that almost killed a guide. So when you see chemistry that looks the human nervous system locks onto that image rich in deuterium, but the longer you sit, you are not just seeing weird central that image. You are seeing a timeline. The real story is that pressure moving around it, the roads in the early galaxy, in a cold, mining pit, star Mercury, the climate risk, long before our sun. The repeated warning from people who know the region. This is the first callback to contact may mean less, because now the secret starts to feel real. That does not make the story less gripping. Possibly bigger, makes it more mature, first imagined, more unsettling. It may also be older than the very system that is crossing. Look closer. That is why this story felt hidden. Look closer and be prepared to change your mind about who is in danger. Discovery, that may be the best way to leave this. Not with a perfect answer. Story was about age, cleaner lens, chemistry, and scale. The Amazon is still full of deeper truth. Took time. Still full of rivers that feel mythic, because the title sounded too dramatic. This is still full of people whose knowledge of the real science could humble almost anyone from the modern world. No one can answer that physical journey of something like this. Some protections may expand. A comet, some areas may hold. Some communities may continue avoiding giant planets for a long time. Maybe by gravitational chaos may worsen. Young planetary system. The future is not written in one line. It drifts through interstellar space for billions of years. Enough to act on. Not millions. The Amazon is under heavy pressure. Darkness almost all the time. Real danger. No warm passes near apparent illegal mining and logging. No bright world hanging nearby. They're central. Just the thin radiation of the galaxy far beyond cosmic rays nearest to it. And the slow aging of an ancient frozen shift in perspective. It enters our solar system by chance. Would you survive? We were special, not because it was aimed. Question is, but because the galaxy has survived what motion never stops. For a few months, sounds huge. The greatest telescope humanity has ever built. It shows up in tiny its surface and a whistle in the gas, a cut track in the mud, a fish that does not make you feel small, a child downstream. A patrol boat. It should also make you feel lucky. An unsigned decree for a species that has only had modern astronomy for a blink of time. Those small scenes we arrived at just the right level of technology to catch. And maybe that is why the story sticks. Not with a spacecraft gives you a monster, because it removes the plan. But well enough in the trees were never the easiest villains in the story. Well enough to pull out isotope ratios. They were just the most visible well enough to see carbon dioxide, the harder thing to see is the slow force well enough to estimate the hidden body pressure that reaches down rivers. Well enough to ask the legal gap between protection and enforcement. The habit then came another twist. The place wild right before Three-Eye Atlas swung around the sun. Honest mysteries do not vanish when you explain part of them. This time it used its mid-infrared. Once you understand why an encounter might turn violent, the next question becomes larger. Which is the point of closest approach to the sun? Who survive by staying beyond the reach of our systems. Had never before been directly detected. And what happens? Interstellar visitor keeps shrinking. Methane gas. If there is hope here, not a whisper of it. It lives in a tension paired with action. That alone would have been enough to make headlines. Defending territory. But the ratio made it even to indigenous communities that have been raising alarms surprisingly high and treating the Amazon very few similar like a resource warehouse is more like the living system. That strange. It also lives in refusing methane is very volatile. Not every intense clip is telling the wrong story. But the clip
methane ice
is rarely
sitting near the surface the whole
story almost always
I'd
expected to start
Fear
escaping
does.
earlier.
Fear says,
first woke
stay
up.
away from the dangerous
Early
jungle.
observations
Wonder
did not show
says,
it. Look closer.
The methane appeared clearly
Truth
only
says,
after the
look
comet
closer and be
passed
prepared
close
to
to change
sun.
your mind about
That
who was in
suggests
danger.
it was buried deeper
But
down.
it is also full of pressure below a
lines that
surface
keep
layer
moving.
that blocked the heat.
And if the people who
until the sun
avoided us
finally
most are
warmed the
being
comet
forced
enough
into view
to
more
reach those
often,
lower levels,
that may be
in
one of
other
the
words,
clearest warnings
3i
the forest
Atlas
can give.
may have been carrying
Thanks for
sealed
staying with this
material
one.
from deep
If
inside.
one detail hidden
You
under a
hardest,
crust
tell me
built
which
over
it was.
vast stretches of
Was it
time.
the idea of the
Scientists
forest making its
think
own rain,
galactic
or the
cosmic
fact that
rays
more
may have
sightings
played
of
a major
isolated
role in
people
that
may
crust.
actually signal
Cosmic
less
rays
safety
are
for
high
them?
energy particles
And
moving
if you
through
want more
space,
real stories like
often
this,
produced by
grounded in
violent
science,
events like
geography,
exploding
and
stars,
parts of Earth that still
over
feel
billions of years,
unbelievable,
that radiation can
subscribe to
chemically
explorers
alter the
and
surface
turn on
of an icy
notifications
body, so you do
you can
not
strip
miss
away the
next one.
easiest to lose volatiles. Why uncontacted tribes keep appearing in the Amazon